around violence, power, eroticism, and death. It was the kind of escapism that let them feel important, different, above the boredom that surrounded them. For most, it was just talk, a way to rebel, to feel alive. But not all of them. Multiple people pointed to two names, two boys in the group who, according to several members, talked openly about murder, and they would do it almost all the time as if it were a joke. They spoke of it so often it stopped raising eyebrows, like it was just another part of their strange Denny's world. But now, in the wake of 4 brutal murders, detectives couldn't ignore it. The investigation was no longer just about who had done it. It was now about who had spoken about it, who had fantasized about death enough to make it real. And behind the smiles, the black clothes, the talk of rebellion, police were about to uncover something much more sinister. They were hunting a killer, and he was young. Too young, and he hadn't done it alone. The trail was starting to heat up. With whispers pointing toward the same 2 names over and over again, detectives decided it was time to pay a visit to Baranyi and Anderson. Both boys were part of the Denny's group, the late-night misfits with a taste of rebellion, and both had already raised eyebrows by casually talking about murder in a way that now felt less like teenage adventure stories and more like foreshadowing. When officers arrived at their homes, the boys didn't seem rattled. In fact, they seemed calm for people who had just heard of a murder within their own group. Baranyi, in particular, spoke with an eerie kind of detachment. He told detectives that on the night of the murders, he and Anderson had been holed up at his place, playing video games for hours. He described it as a quite boring night in, nothing unusual. It was a story that seemed convenient. Too convenient. But the detectives were not ready to build trust with these kids just yet. They started looking for inconsistencies, and one of the first things they zeroed in on were the shoes. A distinctive shoe tread had been found at the Wilson crime scene. It wasn't just any generic sole. It had a specific pattern that left a deep, unmistakable print in the bloodied carpet. Investigators asked Baranyi to show them his shoes. He complied, pulling out a pair of brown work shoes and telling them those were the only ones he owned. Nothing out of the ordinary, he said, just regular shoes. But Baranyi wasn't counting on people talking. Witnesses that involved both neighbors and classmates started chipping away at his carefully built alibi. One of his own friends told detectives that Baranyi actually did own boots. Not the brown work shoes he showed police, but a different pair, ones with soles that looked disturbingly similar to the prints found in the Wilsons' blood-soaked home. And that alibi about playing video games all night started falling apart just as quickly. Neighbors of Baranyi told investigators they hadn't seen Anderson at the house that night. They had heard him pulling all-nighters before, but that night wasn't one of them. The truth was unraveling, piece by piece. As detectives dug back into the crime scene, they discovered something chilling that hadn't been obvious at first. 2 distinct types of bloody footprints. Not just one set of shoes walking through the carnage, but 2. That changed everything. It confirmed what police were already beginning to suspect. This hadn't been a solo job. It had been a team effort. At least 2 people had walked into the Wilson home that night, fully intent on wiping out an entire family, together, coordinated. And now the evidence was starting to whisper names, Baranyi and Anderson. They had blood on their hands, and Bellevue detectives were getting closer to proving it. The truth, when it came, was worse than anyone imagined. 5 days after that first round of questioning, detectives circled back to Baranyi. Something had changed in his demeanor. The mask was slipping. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the guilt, or just the lack of it. But he folded. Without much prompting, he began to talk. And once he started, he didn't stop. There was no emotion, no visible remorse. Just a cold, clinical recounting of events, as if he were